All right, welcome back everyone to the last session for day 3 of State of the World 2021. I'm David Kramer with the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University, and hope you've been enjoying the past 3 days, and they'll all be posted on YouTube, and you can look them up on FIU's website as well. And we have a great session to close the day, and we'll be back tomorrow and Friday, but to close today, and that is with Steve Biegun, who just recently left his latest position as the Deputy Secretary of State. And also before that had been the Special Representative, a Special Envoy for North Korea and lead negotiator between the United States and North Korea. Steve has had nearly 2 decades in government, including working on the Hill and working in the George W. Bush administration. And in interest of full disclosure, he and I have been close friends for many, many years. But Steve, a warm welcome to you. Thanks very much for doing this. I think it's your first opportunity since leaving government. And so looking forward to the conversation with you. And if I can get started by asking you a question that I imagine is on quite a few people's minds, and that is, given your experience, you worked for Jesse Helms on the Hill, you worked for Bill Frist on the Hill. As I mentioned, you worked in the George W. Bush administration. You were on the John McCain campaign in 2008. How does working in the Trump administration stack up against all of those?
Well, it was definitely different. There's a lot more differences than just the individuals too. It's a difference between working in the executive branch or working in the congressional branch. With John McCain, I worked in the nonprofit world too, as the Moscow representative for the International Republican Institute. The continuous thread through all of it is that I'm a Republican foreign policy professional and have served across these 30 years on and off with leaders in every position now, top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs, Senate Foreign Relations, White House, Secretary of State. I have a lot of, I need to just do a lot of digesting over these past 2.5 years, particularly the last year as Deputy Secretary. But there are some things that I think would be readily apparent to anybody. President Trump kept his own counsel. I think there were people he listened to, and I should be careful not to represent myself as particularly close to the White House. I was in the Department of State. The vast majority of my time was there or overseas working with other countries around the world. But he kept his own counsel. He made gut judgments, and he's a person who's not steeped in the traditions or the conventions of foreign policy. And so he was more than ready to make abrupt U-turns in U.S. foreign policy that obviously were very unsettling to many people, including at times even to those of us in the administration. But it also created some opportunities that he would challenge sacred cows and conventional wisdom. That's what allowed this spate of successful recognitions of Israel by several Arab states at the end of the administration. Even in the case of North Korea, while I read everything on the subject, so I know the commentary, and I know the range of views on President Trump's diplomacy. He did present us with an opportunity to try and test solutions that heretofore would have been unthinkable. And he did it without the opposition that it probably would have engendered from the Republican Party, interestingly, had it been done by a Democratic president. The second thing is there wasn't a lot of process, and that is challenging. Process doesn't guarantee good policy, but bad process is a pretty good indicator of bad policy outcomes. And execution was at times challenging as well. Foreign policy generally doesn't fail in the planning phase, it fails in the execution. And those are things that really took an enormous amount of effort for those of us in the agencies in order to deliver on within the constraints of what our direction was, but what we thought was the right outcomes for the United States. I can't.
Yeah, sorry about that. In addition to operating with a president who, to put it mildly, was unconventional in his approach to foreign policy, you, is in your time as deputy secretary, almost the entire time, it came a little after you started, had to deal with the COVID pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. How did that complicate things in terms of other issues that still needed to be addressed, while also dealing with the pandemic itself?
Yeah, almost my entire tenure as deputy secretary was overshadowed by the pandemic. The My first day in office was January 2nd of last year, and that was the day that the U.S. military took a strike against Qasem Soleimani. So that was day one in the office, and then about 10 days later, I was called down to the operations center by our deputy head of operational medicine across the department, and had received some very alarming reports about this virus that was starting to spread in central China. And from then, it really was an overshadowing factor in everything we did. Setting aside the issue of COVID-19, which I'm happy to speak to, but let me just talk about operating that environment. We hollowed out the State Department. We went down to probably just at a certain point, outside of diplomatic security and the custodial staff, probably a couple dozen people inside the department. And that includes the ops center, includes seventh floor leadership. As I was mentioning to you while we were in the green room, I'm still a newbie at these Zoom conferences. Only the last week have I been really able to do them, because we didn't do them. We were in the office every day, and I watched the department hollow out. Of course, we lost the ability to travel. We lost the ability for several months to host anybody in the department. It was closed to all visitors. But I really have to credit my team more than even myself. But I was the convener. We put together weekly conference calls with groups of like-minded countries in North America, in the transatlantic relationship, and in the Indo-Pacific. And to this day, I can name 17 counterparts from Canada, Mexico, the European Quad, Italy, the Asian Quad, Korea, New Zealand, Vietnam, who I was on the phone with every week, and we were coordinating on COVID. That's what we did. And just having that lifeline was hugely important to building a sense of common purpose. We coordinated on threats like disinformation, for sure, which we were all facing, particularly in those months of April and May. And through the process of just direct communications and consistent communications, I think we not only sustained, but actually built out a lot of cooperation. You know, we repatriated 100,000 American citizens who were trapped around the world in that period, under the department, and using all of our tools. That was an around-the-clock effort, but all of my European and Asian counterparts had the same challenge. And we helped each other with border crossings. We kept supply chains open. We reallocated PPE quietly, because it's so hugely politically controversial, to make sure that anybody in an absolute crisis, there's a lot of cooperation behind the scenes. It's missing now on the vaccines, quite honestly, but I think we did a lot in the COVID world, playing the hand that we were dealt.
As you look at the, maybe in your case, outbox, but the inbox for new Secretary Blinken, what would you say are sort of the top 3-4 items that are gonna seize his attention?
Yeah, so COVID-19 has to be at the top of that, of course. This is a national threat, unsurpassed by anything we've faced in my lifetime, and it's not over yet. And these mutations are alarming, and the faster we can get this under control here, the better. The secretary has to be focused on that. But there's particular dimensions that are on the plate of the Secretary of State. We need a coordinated vaccination effort globally. This is something that was lacking in our administration. Quite honestly, we had it drafted, we had it together. We just couldn't get it through the interagency process in the final months. And we saw this coming from a mile away. We knew as early as midsummer that there was a likelihood we could have vaccines by November. And we really pushed in the department to have an answer for what does that mean for the rest of the world, not just for us. It's not too late, because right now, truth be known, there's not enough supply to actually address those needs, but we need the plan in place. And it wouldn't surprise you to know that I highlighted this with my successors in the transition process. Second, on COVID, we need a international aid program, partially just for public health systems in countries that face these challenges without the resources to address them, but also in longer term, we're going to need an economic recovery plan on a global basis. There are a lot of fragile states that this will just push them right over the edge. The second wave of tragedy is going to be the food crisis that we're going to see in many countries around the world, even as they come out of the pandemic. China has been much talked about during these 3 days, David. That's got to be the second issue on the plate. We need I hate the cliche all of government, but we need a strategic approach. And I actually am confident that we have the people in place in this administration to do that too. So it's a challenge, but I think they're up to it. And lastly, an issue that also has been discussed with this, and one that really is I found not despairing, but really challenging, is restoring the verve and the energy in the Democratic West. We just gotta shake off the torpor and get back to work.
But how much of that is due to what's happened here in the United States? I mean, the United States obviously has been a leader for decades in the liberal international order. And it's not simply to say the past 4 years, but there have been concerns about what's been happening here, but especially say in the past month or so. What's the impact of what's happened here on that overall effect on democracy and human rights around the world, and particularly as the United States is a leader?
I think it's got many causes, but the outsized effect is here. We're the United States of America, and if we can't get it right, it's a lot harder to expect other countries are. But the same fraying of society and the polarization in democratic societies, and interestingly, this 50-50 outcome that is increasingly prevalent in democratic systems, minority governments and parliamentary systems have become very much the norm. There is a lack of ability to aggregate as a society in a larger sense as American citizens or as citizens of any other country, but in a smaller sense politically too. There are a lot of causes for that. Some of it is the nature of our leaders. Some of it is the technology that you've discussed earlier today. I think the ability to atomize society is one of the most destructive elements of social media and the information society we live in. You can atomize, and then you can polarize very, very easily using the tools of particularly social media. So, but to your bigger question, of course, if we got to get it right first, and we got a lot of work to do as a nation.
I know I've left the State Department in January 2009, but still have a number of friends there, and I know many of them really admire the job you did in trying to provide some stability. But how challenging was it for you performing your responsibilities in light of what was going on, particularly say in the past couple of months?
Yeah. Look, first, let me just say it's never not an honor to serve the United States of America. And I served the Constitution, I served my nation, and more importantly than me, I was surrounded by the finest public servants in the world who every day woke up and came in and tried to make the world better for our country and for other countries around the world. I share Secretary Blinken's high esteem for the professionals in the department, and I never was shy about saying so. And I got a lot back from it. I got enormous. I would come in with a challenge or an issue. I'd pull the team together, and they would just get to work. COVID-19 being one that's exemplary. I had a lot of advantages because I was a deputy, and I have to just hats off to one of your speakers earlier today, Matt Pottinger. He ran a deputies process that was the glue that held the government together, which is often the case with the deputies process. That isn't entirely unique, but it was a no ego team effort that did everything from shape our China policies to issues like electoral security. Matt led Matt led a weekly deputies committee meeting on election security that gave us one of the most secure elections that we've had in our lifetime, in all likelihood. We don't know what kind of mischief might have been done before we were really mindful of it starting in 2016. But I got to tell you, this time we were ready. And I wish we'd been this ready in 16. But anyway, you get a lot more space when you're the deputy. A lot of my focus is internal. The secretary wanted me to focus on the building, and so I could focus on the people. And I will never see any silver lining in the pandemic, but I will say that it reordered my day. I wasn't traveling to a lot of international conferences and doing embassy dinners or hosting, visiting officials in my office during large portions of the summer. But I could focus every day with our head of human resources, head of talent, and the director general of the Foreign Service, and the head of APSA, and all the other individuals who have core leadership responsibilities for making the department run as well as it can.
So let's dig into some of the issues and countries that you had responsibility for. North Korea, of course, was the first one that you were dealing with. Experience from that and advice that you would give the new administration.
So in 2017, I was in the private sector. I worked for a large U.S. multinational, and I was in charge of our political risk. And the last thing I did before I came into government was the deep dive on the risk of war on the Korean Peninsula. And I was convinced that it was close. I don't know how close it was. Others who were in place at that time have moved on, but it was serious. And when I was asked to do that job, part of the reason I did it is because I thought here was a chance to completely and fundamentally change the direction of events on the Korean Peninsula. And while I do think the Singapore summit between the president and Chairman Kim Jong-un was a monumental event, I came into the position later that summer with the assumption that the decision had been made, and it was about shaping the, creating the pathway and the roadmap to get there. And what I found was North Korea hadn't made the decision yet. And that's largely what has paralyzed us today. And when I say the decision, I mean denuclearization, but I mean much larger than that too, just recasting the course of history on the Korean Peninsula. There is a very bright future that's possible for the people of North Korea. Sandwiched between Russia, China, and South Korea. Once you open up that territory, you've got a crossroads of the world, certainly a crossroads of Asia. The North Koreans are stuck, and a close friend in South Korea described it to me as this: that Kim Jong-un's political objectives, sustaining a dynastic dictatorship, are imperiled by his economic objectives, opening North Korea to trade and to investment, to tourism. And his economic objectives, of course, are imperiled by his political objectives. He has a decision to make, and if he made the decision to change history, and he made that, for example, in Hanoi at the last summit with President Trump, he could have changed history, but he missed that opportunity.
Just one more on North Korea before we move on to some others. How challenging was it to keep a focus on a policy process versus, if you will, the whims of the president?
So I approached it in this way, that every day I woke up and I had a set of facts. And the challenge for me as a foreign policy specialist wasn't to look at that set of facts and groan and throw my hands up in the air. It was how to move it around, how to navigate through it, how to position, how to leverage it. As maddening as some of the president's tweets have been over particularly in recent weeks, at times, you could take that and you would just say, okay, how do we use that as leverage? How do we use that to create an opening? And I'm a very practical person. The president was elected by the American people in 2016. That I never doubted that, quite honestly, and you know that. And he's the president. My job is to figure out how to get the best out of the policies that serve the country, and to give my best advice too, incidentally. And not always listen to, but that's another common denominator across all the various positions I've had over the years. I've always tried to give my best advice, and I haven't always been successful in convincing the principal to do it. But in this case on North Korea, President gave us a lot of space for maneuver. but the North Koreans just weren't ready to move.
So let's move on to Belarus and Russia, if we can. You traveled to Moscow in the fall after events unfolded in Belarus, where Lukashenko tried to steal the election in Belarus, and thousands of people in Belarus turned out in the streets and were met with just an ugly, despicable, brutal crackdown by Lukashenko and his thugs. Describe that whole experience, and also dealing and negotiating with the Russians, maybe both on Belarus, and if you could tack on, you also traveled to Moscow, I believe, on North Korea as well.
Yeah. On Belarus, I had a chance in August, just shortly after she had arrived in Vilnius, to go and meet with Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who is an extraordinary individual, a person of enormous courage.
In fact, she's going to join us briefly tomorrow for a session.
She is the leader of Belarus, in my view. Lukashenko is the ruler, but he's not the leader. He's a ruler. I went to Lithuania first to show American support for the Belarusian opposition. I wasn't going to be able to get into Belarus to do that, but did it in Lithuania, and then went to Moscow, both to share a view with the Russians that, as bad as relations were, they could get worse. Were Russia to seek to intervene, and they have. I should be clear. I know they have. We saw Bortnikov's plane fly into Minsk on more than one occasion, and I think what the Russians did is, in particular, is after the most severe violence that he deployed in the immediate aftermath of the election, the Russians came to say, hey, you don't have to do it that way. Do it this way. It's much more sophisticated. They switched out the media. They put the Russian broadcasters in the Belarusian chair, and they coached the security forces on how to use the appropriate level of force to break the back of a political opposition, arresting only men initially, not letting them go, keeping them a couple of days and letting them go. Just, they found ways they sought to degrade the opposition. So I say that as a digression because I'm not Pollyannish about the Russian role here, but we also suggested to the Russians that this wasn't necessarily going to be a contest between the East and the West. The Belarusians simply were seeking self-determination. And it was actually a fairly constructive conversation, but I think at the end of the day, the Russians' instincts are wrong. The point was often made that the protesters in Belarus weren't carrying NATO signs or EU signs or the American flag, that it wasn't manifestly a pro-Western or an anti-Russian protest. But a European friend told me that was never the problem with Putin. The problem for Putin was that the protesters in Khabarovsk were carrying Belarus signs on the streets, and that was the problem.
Do you think when you were still a state, should the administration should it have taken a more forceful response toward the poisoning of Navalny?
Yeah, we did something. Dan Fried mentioned earlier that we did nothing. We imposed sanctions against a number of officials and institutions in Russia that were responsible for it. But these are sanctions on people who bluffly dismiss them, and they're not gonna come to the U.S. anyway, and so on. What we did on Belarus is we coordinated with the Europeans, and we got a nice parity and a set of sanctions that increased pressure, and I think we can do further. I think we just need to keep ratcheting up the pressure on Lukashenko, and there's some other things I know that the new administration is thinking about that I think could have great effect. In the case of Navalny, even Navalny has at times dismissed the sanctions. I know that his supporters have called for specific targeted sanctions against some interesting characters that we hadn't really thought about to really begin to amplify the effect. I think that is an interesting proposal, and I wish we'd thought about it at the time. But my concern is that that it's not enough. And one of the things that I talked to my European counterparts about is getting in place some steps in advance so that we wouldn't be reactive, because we knew this was coming. First of all, we knew he'd been poisoned. Second, we knew it was going to be confirmed to be Novichok. Third, we knew if he went back to Russia, he'd likely face additional depredations, as he has. And so we really want to do is get him in place in advance, but we were unable to. Obviously, the long pole in the tent was Nord Stream 2. You guys, your panel before talked about that. And we talked about it. I thought at a certain point we might get the Germans there, actually. But I don't know. It's every day we get another inch closer to the goal line, and we're already at the 1 yard line.
So I screwed up by not inviting questions from the audience, but let me try to squeeze in 3 more questions
Sure.
Before we wrap up, Steve. There were a number of steps that the department took right as it was walking out the door. The designation of the Houthis in Yemen, the genocide with the Uyghurs. People may actually agree or disagree on those, but were those sort of rushed through, do you think, to try to tie the new administration's hands?
Each of those were debated for months, and particularly the Houthi designation was a very long and at times contentious debate. And likewise the genocide declaration on the Uyghurs. If you accepted some of the legal judgments, the bar is set so high to call something like that a genocide that we virtually couldn't call something a genocide. And so it is. I would say this: ends of administration are action-causing events, forced decisions. So you heard the dogs that barked. You didn't hear the dogs that didn't bark. There were another half dozen issues that were out there that were being wrestled with all the way to the end with different views inside the department. What we did on the Uyghur designation, I agree with the secretary. I agree with the former secretary. By my smell test, that passes the definition of genocide, and it's terrible what's happening there. And it's terrible that this doesn't excite more reaction in the European populations. But frankly, I'm not sure Americans are really walking around with front of mind thinking about the Uyghurs either, sadly. On Houthi designation, the challenge was how to isolate Ansar Allah, the Houthi political organization, without adding to the misery of the people. And it's tough. Sanctions have consequences, and I dealt with this in North Korea as the special representative. We sought as much as possible. And as I was leaving the office, a very, very strong team was continuing to work to carve out as much as possible humanitarian exceptions for that. But I would say that it was a calculated judgment risk return in the end when the secretary made the judgment that isolating the Iranian-backed regime in Yemen was going to create a better possibility for an outcome that brings peace to Yemen than the contrary. Time will tell. The Biden administration can move any way it wants on that one too.
So let me combine the last two into one. I'll ask them at the same time here in our last few minutes. What do you make of what's happening in the GOP? You could answer either on foreign policy or the broader foreign and domestic policy. And then with that, let me ask you what you think someone we both knew well, you worked on his campaign in 2008. What do you think John McCain would be thinking right about now?
So I'm deeply disturbed by what's happening in the GOP, and I see my job as a lifelong Republican, and a proud one, who believes in small government, strong national defense, the success of the free market system. We got some work to do. We have to take a long, hard look at the mirror, because the tone of our politics isn't the disease, it's the symptom. The disease is a disaffection by many Americans from our political system, from our leaders, and we're going to have to figure out how to address that. Some of that's policy, some of that's how we approach it. And there's a lot of work to do. How do I think John McCain would think about it? I think about him a lot. And one of the things that I learned from John McCain that I loved about the guy was that he ran to the sound of gunfire. When he saw a problem, he didn't throw up his hands. He didn't walk away from it. He got right in it. And that's what we have to do. That's what those of us who purport to represent the ideals of the Republican Party have to do. We have to get in this fight. It's playing out right now in the House of Representatives, David. I don't think I need to tell you where I hope the outcome is. I hope that Looney from Georgia gets a setback, and I'm hoping Liz Cheney is not only reelected to be the whip, but also set in motion to be a strong leader for the future of the Republican Party. And I think it's time for us Republicans to show our hand.
Steve Biegun, former Deputy Secretary of State, thanks very much for taking the time to join us today. Thanks for your service to the country. And perhaps to me, most personally, thanks for your friendship. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Thank you all.
Thanks. That brings us to an end of day 3 here at State of the World 2021. Thanks very much for joining us. We start again bright and early tomorrow at 9 a.m. looking at the global economic crisis. And we look forward to seeing you then. You can catch all of our sessions on YouTube. And thanks a lot for joining us. See you tomorrow.
The environment that students are facing today is unlike ever before.
It's all about team-based work in the 21st century of careers.
Being able to do teamwork and compromise on their positions and play the role of different sectors, the public, the private, the nonprofit sector, with different strategic priorities, and being able to combine them all and superpose them into an initiative that truly adds value to all the organizations and the actors involved.
The way that we communicate has changed.
More and more we're bringing in professionals who have a skill set that combines with the academic expertise of other faculty members that really make a difference.
I want to be able to remove the fourth wall between the classroom and the world around us.
The different experiences that the faculty and the masters has were fundamental to really understand what I needed and to gain these different points of view to become a better professional.
One of the most important dimensions, and it's really the crowning achievement of the program, is the capstones.
Capstones, for me, as somebody who comes to this work in international affairs as a practitioner, I think is one of the best parts of the program.
The value of what they did in the classroom is manifest in this particular capstone project.
It allows them to take everything that they've learned in our program up until that moment and practically apply it.
It allowed me to develop and create innovative solutions for the corporation I work with. It was an opportunity to understand how corporations really integrate corporate responsibility into business operations.
Students are working directly with the policymaker.
Really prepare me with the tools and skills needed to succeed at my former position at Citigroup as a problem manager for Latin America, and currently here at Rocco Collins as the senior specialist in gold trade compliance.
If they want to pursue studies or careers in international affairs of one sort or another, whether in the government or in the private sector or in the think tank world or in academia, the FIU's MAGA program, the Green School's MAGA program, really is a terrific way to get started.
To the person that is considering the Masters of Global Affairs here at FIU, I recommend it because it is a program that is tailored to the needs of the global market